My brother and my wife betrayed me, and my father prioritized family honor over justice. That's, my half-brother and my wife betrayed me, and my father told me to keep quiet for the sake of the family's reputation. That was the final straw, setting me on a path of no return. I resolved to destroy every bridge, leaving no possibility of reconciliation. I, a 30-year-old man, have an older half-brother, whom I'll call Daniel, age 35. My dad had Daniel with his first wife, but he left her when Daniel was just 6 months old. My mom told me they divorced because they had irreconcilable differences. However, my dad stayed actively involved in Daniel's life, sharing custody with his ex-wife. 2 years after the divorce, my dad met my mom, and they married within a year. My mom calls it a whirlwind romance. She recalls sitting at a cafe when my dad spotted her from outside. Apparently, he was smitten at first sight and walked in to introduce himself. After just a few months of dating, he proposed, and my mom accepted immediately, convinced they were destined to be together. It all sounds picture-perfect, right? Unfortunately, about a year into their marriage, my dad had an affair with a colleague. Riddled with guilt, he confessed, and my mother chose to forgive him. They attended counseling and worked through their issues. My mom believed that having a baby would cement their relationship, and that's how I came into the picture. My mom tells this as a love story, but I see my parents as deeply flawed. The perfect facade they present to the world is just that, a facade. Their obsession with appearances even extended to me. When I was young, they went out of their way to seem like the ideal couple, always affectionate when others were around. They were showered with praise for keeping the romance alive after so many years. But at home, things were different. They were just a normal couple with the usual ups and downs, nothing like the dream image they portrayed. It didn't take me long to notice the cracks. This obsession with perfection carried over into my upbringing. I was forced to take on endless activities so I'd excel at everything. My schedule was packed, leaving little room to breathe. It wasn't until high school that I started pushing back, and eventually, they eased up on me. My dad was determined that both Daniel and I would be exceptional. Daniel went to one of the best medical schools in the country, while I earned a spot at a prestigious Ivy League business program. The pressure was intense, and while I don't endorse their methods, I can't deny that it worked out academically for me. But their control didn't stop at our education. My dad believed he had the right to meddle in our personal lives too, and my mom always backed him up. When Daniel turned 30, my dad declared it was time for him to settle down. He insisted Daniel would run out of options if he waited any longer. At that time, Daniel was in an on-again, off-again relationship with a woman named Olivia, age 34. They had been together for about 5 years. After my dad's lecture, Daniel became serious about Olivia, proposed within a year, and they tied the knot 3 years ago. Last year, they had a baby. Daniel and I were never close, so I learned about all this from my dad rather than him. Earlier this year, my dad had the same talk with me. He bragged about how he'd convinced Daniel to marry Olivia and how happy Daniel was with a family. Then he turned his focus on me, urging me to follow in my brother's footsteps. He even brought up his own past affair, framing it as a lesson. He claimed that becoming a father grounded him and suggested I'd find similar fulfillment. I took his advice with skepticism and didn't let it influence my decisions. Little did he know I'd already made my choice. I was planning to propose to my girlfriend, Natalie, age 30. We had been together for 3 years and living together for 2. I felt ready to take the next step. 2 months after that conversation with my dad, I proposed on my birthday. Natalie said yes, and we got married 3 months later. For a brief time, I thought everything was perfect. Couldn't have been more wrong. Natalie and I had been married for just 2 months when everything fell apart. About a week ago, I filed for divorce after discovering she'd been having an affair with Daniel. It had been going on since we got engaged. The revelation was devastating, and I wouldn't have known if I hadn't stumbled across her second phone by accident. One evening, I couldn't find a shirt I was looking for and started searching around the house. Natalie was out at the time, and I thought she might have misplaced it with her clothes. While going through her wardrobe, I found something unexpected in the pocket of her jeans. A second phone. The phone didn't have a lock screen, and there was only one text conversation on it. The number looked familiar. Sure enough, it was Daniel's. Horrified, I scrolled through the messages. The text started about 3 weeks after I proposed to Natalie, and they were flirting like infatuated teenagers. A few months into our engagement, they confessed their love for each other and made promises to stick together no matter what. Their plan was to remain with their respective partners until my nephew turned 5 and became less dependent on his mother. Then they'd file for divorce and reveal their affair. Daniel would get shared custody of his son, and they'd finally be together. I was horrified reading all this, even more so when I realized they intended to carry on this charade for 5 years. It was completely deranged. I immediately began packing my belongings so I could leave the house. Natalie wouldn't be home until late, so I had the time to take as much as I could. I took screenshots of the messages on her burner phone and drove to a hotel a few towns away. I didn't leave her a note. I just left the burner phone on our bed. I knew she'd understand what it meant. I felt physically sick. Although Daniel and I had never been especially close, we weren't on bad terms either. From the texts, I learned that he had made his move on Natalie the very night of our engagement. I had proposed during my birthday party with friends and family, including Daniel in attendance. While I was busy entertaining guests, Daniel and Natalie were making out in the backyard. I had noticed Natalie was missing for a while, but I assumed she was touching up her makeup. Reading their messages, I realized they'd been reminiscing about that night, referencing it multiple times. It was disgusting. While I was celebrating our engagement, Natalie was betraying me with my married brother, the father of a child. That evening, I called my lawyer and told him I wanted to file for divorce. I was determined that Natalie wouldn't get anything from me, no alimony, no settlement. I was in a much higher earning position than her, and she'd mocked my profession in her texts with Daniel. She had written that she'd rather be with a doctor than a glorified accountant. For the record, I co-own a successful business with 2 friends from business school. We've done very well for ourselves. Natalie's disdain for my work was baffling, considering she was a corporate employee herself. Her materialism and condescension made her betrayal even more painful. They had ridiculed me behind my back, and my resentment toward Daniel grew stronger. I knew I would eventually tell Olivia, Daniel's wife, about the affair. She deserved to know. But I needed time to gather the courage because I was in a dark place emotionally. As soon as I found the phone, I blocked both Natalie and Daniel on every platform. I didn't want to hear their excuses. I was done. 2 days after moving to the hotel, I expected at least one of them to try to apologize. Instead, on the 3rd day, I got a call from my father. He began by saying he had heard about the affair. Natalie had realized I knew when she found the burner phone on the bed and immediately contacted Daniel. Since neither of them could reach me, Daniel spoke to my dad, who managed to get through to me. At first, my dad said he was sorry for what had happened, and I thought he was being supportive. But then he asked me not to tell anyone about the affair. I already suspected why, but I asked anyway. I recorded his response. My dad admitted that both he and Daniel were terrified I would tell Olivia about the affair. They wanted me to keep it quiet for now. My father explained that, unlike me, Daniel had a child to consider. He claimed that if Olivia found out, she'd leverage her family's wealth and connections to secure full custody of their son. My dad said Daniel couldn't afford to let that happen. Through him, they were begging me to stay silent. My parents even said they had confronted Daniel and made him promise to stop seeing Natalie. My dad suggested I try to reconcile with Natalie, just as my mom had forgiven his infidelity decades ago. He claimed their marriage had turned out beautifully despite the hurdles. I was stunned by their audacity. How could they expect me to forgive and forget after such a betrayal? I couldn't believe they had the nerve to ask me to protect Daniel after everything he'd done. I hung up immediately, furious and disgusted. My parents had always been obsessed with maintaining a pristine family image, but this was beyond the pale. They genuinely thought I would sweep everything under the rug for the sake of appearances. It was madness. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became. Daniel was a product of my father's influence. The cheating apple didn't fall far from the cheating tree. My dad wanted me to keep quiet so Daniel could escape unscathed, just as he had so many years ago. They wanted me to pretend everything was fine while my life was in shambles, all to uphold the illusion of a perfect family. I refused. Enough was enough. After revealing the affair, things spiraled quickly. I knew my decision to inform Olivia would shake things up, but I never expected the aftermath to be so dramatic. Once Olivia confronted Daniel, the fallout was immediate. She packed her things, took their son, and moved in with her parents in Woodmere, the upscale suburb where she grew up. From what I gathered through family chatter, she's consulting a top-tier lawyer to explore her options for divorce and full custody. Knowing her connections and determination, Daniel's chances of maintaining equal custody seem bleak. The backlash from my family was relentless. My parents, Simon and Laura, have been particularly vocal about their disapproval. They've called me selfish and short-sighted, accusing me of destroying what they called a functional family dynamic. Their perspective is skewed, though. To them, it's easier to blame me than to hold Daniel accountable for his actions. I've been bombarded with guilt trips, but I'm standing firm. I didn't ruin a happy family. Daniel and Natalie did that all on their own. As for Natalie, she's been trying to reach out to me ever since I unblocked her number. Her apologies feel hollow, though. She's been sending long-winded messages filled with regret and promises to change. It's hard to take her seriously when I know how meticulously she and Daniel planned their deceit. They weren't just impulsive. They were calculated. Her pleas for forgiveness fall on deaf ears. I've already initiated divorce proceedings, and there's no going back. To clear my head, I've stayed holed up in this small motel just outside of Ridgeview. It's not exactly luxurious, but it's quiet and gives me the space I need. I've told the staff not to disclose my presence to anyone, and they've been accommodating. Work has been my only distraction. I'm managing operations for my business remotely, though the solitude has started to weigh on me. Despite everything, I know staying here is better than facing the circus my family has created back in Brookdale. 3 days ago, I received a tip-off from a friend that Simon and Daniel were searching for me. They had been visiting hotels and motels, determined to drag me back into their mess. I should have known they wouldn't give up easily. Yesterday, they spotted my car in Oak Ridge and stormed into the motel lobby, demanding my whereabouts. Thankfully, the receptionist, Alex, stuck to his word and denied knowing me. Furious, they caused a scene, shouting at him until the manager, Mrs. Hargrove, intervened. She threatened to call the police, forcing them to leave, but the ordeal left me rattled. Later, Simon texted me, filled with manipulation. He blamed me for Olivia's distress and insisted I should support Daniel, not destroy him. I ignored it. They had made their priorities clear, and I refused to be part of their charade. The only message I answered was from Olivia. She thanked me again for telling her the truth and updated me on her plans. She was focused on creating a stable life for her son and was moving forward without Daniel. I respected her strength. Confronting my father and Daniel outside the hotel confirmed how delusional they were. They proposed I testify against Olivia in court, making her seem unfit so Daniel could win custody. They claimed things weren't looking good for him. Olivia had listed numerous grievances, from neglecting their son to avoiding all parental duties. Daniel had never changed a diaper or fed his child, always making excuses. Olivia had tolerated it for years but finally had enough. They thought I would lie in court to help him. It only reaffirmed that telling Olivia the truth was the right choice. I refused outright and walked away. Before returning to my room, I informed Ed, the security manager, to ensure Simon and Daniel were banned from the premises. Soon after, they were escorted out, causing a scene in the lobby. If not for the hotel's discretion, the police would have been called. Update: a couple of months have passed, and life has been hectic. Thankfully, the divorce process was smoother than expected. With a 90-day waiting period, everything settled quickly. Natalie didn't contest anything, so she left with only what she had purchased. No alimony, no settlement. I got the house, moved back in, and retained most of our shared possessions. Our finances had always been separate, so there wasn't much to untangle. Meanwhile, Daniel and Olivia's divorce is turning into a full-blown war, especially over custody. It's tough to watch, knowing my nephew is caught in the middle. The silver lining is that Olivia allows me to see him, which means the world to me. As for me, I'm piecing my life back together. Moving back home felt bittersweet, but now it's mine again. I've been focusing on work and personal growth and even started considering a future where I have a family of my own, just not with Natalie. Things are finally looking up. Here's to new beginnings.